Lent, March 17th. Also, I believe St. Patrick's Day? Weird. All right, so March 17th, fifth Sunday in Lent. Our texts are Jeremiah 31, Hebrews chapter 5, and Mark chapter 10. As usual, we will go through these in a various order. I went and I preached on Mark chapter 10 this morning, so we might leave that to the end. No, I think there's some other stuff I want to say about Jeremiah 31. So we're gonna start with Mark chapter 10, probably move to Hebrews chapter 5, and then on to Jeremiah 31. So let's dive in. And there's two parts to this text. So not everybody who follows these lectionaries, not everybody follows these lectionary cycles, but not everybody who will have followed this will have read 32 to 34, which is the Passion prediction. So and they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them, and they were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. And taking the 12 again, he began to tell them what was to happen to him, saying, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests, the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles. And they will mock him, spit on him, flog him, and kill him. And after 3 days he will rise again." So this is one of the Passion predictions. And so just because of that, I'm going to jump here. And there's usually, you have these variations. And so that's just the, I want the other ones in Mark. 4, 32, 34, that's not the ones I want. So we're going to go scroll up a little bit, because there. So this is in Mark 9. They went on from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know, for he was teaching his disciples, saying, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands..." Let me scroll up just a little bit more. There we go. "Into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days, he will rise." So again, foretelling of the death and resurrection, simply delivered over, killed. Not the flog, not the spit on stuff there. And then there should be one more after Peter's confession, right? So Peter has his confession. Who do people say that I am? Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, others one of the prophets. But who do you say that I am? You are the Christ. Okay? And then Jesus says, he began to teach them that, and so that's why this isn't red lettered, that the Son of Man must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders, priests, scribes, and killed, and after 3 days rise again. And here he said this plainly. He says this straightforward, plainly, so that everybody can understand. That's right behind the thing, isn't it? Yeah. The plainly. After 3 days rise again. He says this plainly. And then, of course, Peter takes him aside and rebukes him. And Jesus rebukes Peter, saying, "Get behind me, Satan." Right? This is the common one that most people know, or most people remember or recognize fairly easily. So that's the first of his Passion predictions. Then again, so this is Mark chapter 8. Then in Mark chapter 9, we have the second one. And now in chapter 10, we get the third Passion prediction. And here it is more fleshed out. Right? He's condemned to death. He's delivered over to the Gentiles. He's mocked, spit on, flogged, and killed, and after 3 days rise again. Now, you'll remember in the first one, there's a rebuttal by Peter. In the second one, and just to make sure I don't mess this up, in the second one, it simply says, but they did not understand the saying. They don't understand what he's talking about. And were afraid to ask him. Right? And maybe they were afraid because of what happened to Peter last time. Now the third time, it doesn't give us they were afraid to ask him, but rather goes into, and so James and John, the sons of Zebedee, come up to him and ask him a question, right? Make the request. So the Passion predictions are great because they do recognize that Jesus knows what he's going to do. It does put the focus in the mind of the disciples, the mind of even the reader, by having these three set up Passion predictions, that you know what the story is moving towards. You see the foreshadowing, and it's not a foreshadowing in like when Jesus cleanses the temple and John says, and when he rose from the dead, they remembered that he said that in 3 days he would destroy this temple and rise again, right? No, this is pretty blatant, straightforward. We're telling you this is what's going to happen in the story. Now, in the modern day audience, I don't think, and for most people today, it's kind of one of those things like everybody knows that Jesus died on the cross. If you know anything about Jesus, you know that he died on a cross. You might not know of all the miracles that he did, all the teaching he did, or maybe you do know some of that stuff. But most importantly, most people know, if they know anything about Jesus, that he was crucified or he was killed. If you have people that think that he was nailed to a stake. But that's kind of the main thrust here, is that for the readers who didn't know or who don't know, Jesus is predicting and telling the future. Jesus is telling what's going to happen. And he's being very plain about it in the first one. He's not really mixing words, stating it straightforward, even though the disciples don't understand or feared to ask him. And here it still seems like they don't understand, and so they're just moving on. Now, this is Mark's gospel, so maybe there's more context in some of the other gospels as it goes through these things. But we're dealing with this text today. This is the text of our focus for today. And so, with that, I think there's a lot to be said here about Jesus preparing his disciples for what they're going to face, and more importantly, preparing his disciples of what he is going to face, what he is going to go through, and pointing them to this. And this is what we talked about, I think, when we talked about Peter's confession, that Peter kind of overlooked the last part. He got wrapped up in the first part of the Son of Man is going to be delivered over to the chief priests and scribes. That's bad. Condemned to death. That's worse. Delivered to Gentiles. That's even worse. Mock, spit up. So you just go through this worse. Well, it can't get any worse than that, and you forget oh yeah, and he rises again on the third day. So there's an element in which that's bad, because we often have that same mindset of we focus all the way through Lent. We spend all this time on Lent, and we're moving towards the cross, crucifixion. And then Easter comes and we're like, Easter's here, yay, Jesus rose from the dead. And then we're just back to normal, right? You spend so much time focusing and pushing to the cross, you forget that the cross is connected to the resurrection. And the resurrection is connected to baptism, just as the cross is. for we are baptized into his death and resurrection. So that's important. Okay. That's the first part. And again, I identified that not everybody has that first part that's in brackets, that section. And so not every church that follows even this lectionary cycle would have necessarily went through that part of the lessons. So then you have the rest of the story, or the rest of the lesson, and I'm just going to leave it over here, just because I'm going to probably want some other references, even though I think over here I don't get the scroll right. So the request from James and John. James and John are the sons of Zebedee, the sons of thunder. They come up to him, Jesus, and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." So, I mean, this is a big ask generally, right? Because generally when somebody says that, they want you to do something that you absolutely don't want to do. Right? Most people don't come in to you and say, "Now, I want to ask you to do something, and I want you to do whatever I ask you to do." You're right then and there, you're just like, nope, not doing it. Not going to do it. That's too risky. But Jesus, on the other hand, knows their hearts. He knows their minds. He knows who they are. And he doesn't say yes, but rather says, "What do you want me to do for you?" He asks the question of, well, what is it that you're asking me to do? And then they said to him, "Grant us to sit one on your right and one on your left in your glory." And here it's always interesting to me because one on the right hand, one on the left, seated, glory, what do these things mean? And we're going to get to that in a little bit. But nevertheless, Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you're asking for. You don't understand. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" And they just blurt out again, one on your right, one on your left, "We are able." Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink, and the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized." Note the passive tense. It's not that they will baptize, but they will be baptized. "But to sit at my right hand, or to be on my right and to be on my left, is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." And when the 10 heard this, all right, so this is when the rest of the apostles hear this, they began to be indignant towards James and John. Because what is in their mind, James and John are asking to usurp everyone else. They're asking for the prime seats at the table. They're asking for the place of prominence. Now, if you remember, Jesus talked before about when you go to a party or when you're invited to a party, don't sit at the prominent places. Sit in the lower seats so that when someone comes, they invite you to the higher seats. Always take the station of the humility, because then they will raise you up and they will glorify you. Versus if you sit in the place of honor and somebody more honorable than you arrives, what happens? Well, now you have to be moved lower. And you don't want to be moved lower. So it's always better to sit in the lowest station and for somebody to say, "Hey, come up here." Humility. So the sons of Zebedee haven't learned humility. They haven't learned about who is the greatest and who is the least. And so Jesus then, in his wisdom and insight, calls all of them together and tells them, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Right? And so this is the idea of lord or governor, rulers, regional rulers, you have lower than that rulers, you have higher than that rulers. The main way in which the Gentiles rule is by power, dominance, domineering, showing that great force. Who is the greatest? I am the greatest because I am the one in authority. Versus, I am the least because I am the one in the authority. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. Right? It's civil service. Right? Civil service, or a civil servant, should be one who serves society, the one who serves the government, one who serves the people, the civilization. Right? That's what a civil servant is supposed to be. Now, most people lose sight of that because they're politicians. They're not civil servants. They're politicians. They're rulers. They're domineering. They want what's best for them. They don't care about the word service. Similarly, the concept of a student athlete. Most people emphasize the word athlete instead of the word student. What's the point of a student athlete? Well, that they're a student who, in addition to being a student, does athlete stuff. Not they're an athlete, and in order to go to your school, they also do some student stuff. That's not the way it works. We have so many of these things, so many of these terms backwards in our day and age that this is hard for us to swallow or hard for us to understand. But this was exactly the point. Why do you need a government? Realistically, we shouldn't need a government. We should all get along. We should all take care of one another. We should all love our neighbor as ourselves. We should all work for one another so that we have the betterment of all people. That would be great if all of us are servants to one another. If all of us are serving and looking outward rather than inward, then we would be able to do that. But because we don't, we need a government. We need some sort of governing authority to keep us all in line, to keep us all in check. But that governing authority, it shouldn't be there. And especially, this is what Jesus is talking about in association with the church. In association with the church is that your structure, your society in the church should not be a society of lording it over people, of telling people what to do and forcing them into this, but your way should be of being service to others. One of the things that I even think about with regards to things like confirmation. So confirmation, baptism, weddings, so forth. My duty or responsibility is to be a service to that individual that's getting baptized, those parents, as well as my service and responsibility to one who's going through the path of confirmation, my service and ability to prepare people for marriage and not just a date on a calendar, right? So there is what we call premarital counseling. There is confirmation instruction, and some people have actually implemented, and I would love to, but pre/post baptismal instruction. And the idea there is basic parenting guidelines, basic parenting kind of things of how are you going to raise this child as a parent? How are you going to be a good Christian parent? What does a good Christian parent look like? It's not, again, to say, this is what you have to do in order to get baptized, or this is what you have to do in order to get confirmed, or this is what you have to do at our church in order to get married. No, the idea is to help them, to be of service to them, so that their raising of the baptized child, their path to confirming their faith, and their path in marriage are all going to be with the understanding of what a Christian marriage looks like, of what a Christian looks like and what parents look like. That's kind of the avenue behind stuff like that, and that's what it should be. Is that often what it is? No. Often what it becomes is we have this 12-step program in order to make you better parents. So we're going to do that. Or we had a 12-step thing of confirmation list that you have to go through, and once you get through that list, then you get confirmed. It's a reward-based system rather than I want to make you better. I want to help you to be a better person. I want to help you to be a better Christian. I want to help you to be a better servant to your neighbors, to your friends, to your family. But that's what it means. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. This is what it means, that we need to have servants. We need to have that servant mindset. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. Right? And to give his life as a ransom for many. Which, again, goes back to the giving the life as a ransom for many, goes back to the kill him that's going by. And after 3 days, rise again. Right? That's what that's going to. Yeah, that's where it locks. Okay. But realistically, I'll be honest with you, the passion prediction and this last service part are not what I preached on. I preached on the focus of the cup I drink, you will drink. The baptism with which I will be baptized, you will be baptized. That's where I focused, because I'm a big advocate that the sitting one on the right and one on the left has to deal with when he comes into his glory, that the Son of Man is glorified as he is lifted up on the cross, and that is where his full glory is shown as the one who lays down his life for many. And so the cup and the baptism are connected to Jesus' death on the cross, his crucifixion. And so the baptism that he's baptized with is a baptism of wrath. The cup that he drinks is the cup of wrath. And so while at first those things would be bad, negative, but because of Christ's death and resurrection, those things are the very things that he gives to us. These are the sacraments. These are very much Jesus pointing to the Lord's Supper in the cup that he drinks and the cup that you will drink. You will share in that cup of his covenant, right? The covenant that is poured out for you. That covenant is founded and grounded in the sacrifice of Christ on the cross. Baptism. Baptism is founded and grounded in Christ's death on the cross. Romans chapter 6. And since we actually have this in front of... Wow. Move, mouse. Romans 6, right? I'm going to scroll down just a little bit so you can see this better. Right there. We were buried, therefore, with him by baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, we too might walk in newness of life. Do you not know that all who have been baptized into Christ were baptized into his death? Right? That's what we're looking at. That context of to help you interpret what is the baptism to which Christ was which I am baptized. You will be baptized. So that's kind of being into baptism. Baptism, we drown with Christ, we rise to newness of life. The Lord's Supper, we eat and drink his body and blood given and shed for us for the forgiveness of sins. Those both connect to Christ's crucifixion. And, of course, the passion prediction at the beginning, and the final, the giving of his life, the laying down of his life as a ransom for many. goes into the middle, which is about these are the sacraments: the Lord's Supper and baptism. Catholic Church has 7 sacraments. Protestants avoid sacramental theology altogether. I don't really want to get into that debate unless you have a question about sacraments and so forth. But if you do, feel free to leave them in the comments section on YouTube or throw them in the Kick Chat whenever I'm on. I'm more than willing to answer those questions or talk about those things. That's not a problem. Okay, but that's what I preached on. I focused in on baptism and that, but here I think that it's really important to think about the passion predictions, the focus on being a servant as a Christian, and then, of course, the sacraments. And with that, understanding the sacraments, you also get this idea of the place that is prepared, right? Because he says here, but to sit at my right hand or my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. This goes into then the emphasis that I would have had if I would have preached on Hebrews chapter 5. And so, that's right. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 5. And as I scroll through this, I want to be able to show you, first of all, this one. And no one takes this honor for himself, but only when called by God, just as Aaron was. So that in Hebrews chapter 5, we see that the chief priests are called by God. And what the author of the Hebrews there is doing is he is pointing out the fact that a chief priest is not made by men. A chief priest is not made by priests. A chief priest is actually made by God. He is chosen by God. So let's go back to the beginning when we talk about among men is appointed. For every high priest chosen from among men is appointed to act on behalf of men in relation to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He can deal gently with the ignorant and wayward, since he himself was beset with weakness. Because of this, he is obligated. Yeah, I thought about that. A little late. All right. Because of this, he is obligated to offer sacrifices for his own sins, just as he does for those of the people. And no one takes this honor for himself, but only when called by God, just as Aaron was. So also Christ did not exalt himself to be made a high priest, but was appointed by him, who said to him, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." Oops. As he saw also in another place, "You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverence. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him, being designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Now, so we talked about the fact that the high priest is called by God. One of the other things is that most of the high priests were of the line and lineage of Levi. The order of Melchizedek is slightly different. Melchizedek means righteous king or just king. Really wouldn't probably be good as holy king. But the idea of a righteous king. And Melchizedek, if you remember, was with Abraham, and he was a priest of the Most High, but he was also a king. And he went and he brought out bread and wine for Abraham. So there's significance there. Some, maybe not the greatest, but there's significance there in connection with Jesus. But the most important part here is really the designation of the high priest coming from God. I think that that's prominent. Melchizedek, the recognition that Jesus is not just any priest, but he's a high priest of the order of Melchizedek. That's important. And that Jesus did prayers, supplications, loud cries, and so forth on earth during his humanity. He learned to suffer, and that's how he learned his obedience. But then you go back up to the weakness part, right? To offer gifts, let me get this right. To offer gifts and sacrifices for sin, he can deal gently with the ignorant and wayward, since he himself is beset with weakness, right? Jesus is not beset with sinfulness. Jesus is not like other high priests that have to give gifts and sacrifice for their own sins. That's not who Jesus is. Jesus is the sinless one. And so, because Jesus is sinless, that means that some of this goes out the window. But because Jesus is man, because Jesus takes on flesh and blood, because Jesus takes on the human nature, this does in fact show that he recognizes our ignorance and our waywardness. He associates with our weakness. It's not weakness in association with sin as other high priests, but it's weakness in association to the frailty of the flesh. And so that's where, even when he talks here, part of that frailty of the flesh is being able to suffer. And being able to, through that suffering, bring forth the source of everlasting life or eternal salvation through his death on the cross. The necessity of Jesus becoming man is not in order for him to be sinless, because he's sinless as God, but the necessity of him as a man is that he can relate to us, that he can pray, supplicate, cry out for us, and understand what's going on better in that relationship. So this is even why Jesus is recognized as our high priest today. And he's recognized in that sense that he is at the right hand of the Father, seated there in the heavenly places, praying, supplicating, crying, tears, all that stuff to the Father on our behalf. So we can pray to Jesus because he's true God. We can pray to the Father because he's true God. But this even shows that relationship between the Father and the Son, that the Son is always praying to the Father on our behalf, just as he did during his earthly ministry. It's a great understanding of when you look at Hebrews chapter 5, to be able to see that we have chief priests that relate to us, and Jesus is no different there. All right. Again, if you have any questions, any thoughts, leave them in the Kick Chat, leave them in the chat below on YouTube. I do try and get to the YouTube ones if there's any there, but most part I haven't seen any there. So we are moving on to Jeremiah chapter 31. This section on the new covenant, which is very interesting in today's day and age, and very interesting as we've talked about Israel and we've talked about Judaism and stuff like that, because this really does, it's another text that kind of upholds what I've told you about who Israel is and our theology around Israel as God's people. But let's read it. Let me scroll down just a little more. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day I took them by the hand to bring them up out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke. Though I was, and this is a great thing, and there's a lot of depth and breadth here, though I was their husband, declares the Lord, for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. I have one kind of leap here. And I will admit that it's a leap in the text to be able to identify it this way. But when that declares the Lord, I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. Now, it's not a leap to say that's the relationship with God, between God and his people. That's not the leap. The leap is to say that this is in particular association with the elect. That would be the leap. The leap to say that when it says, and no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me. Well, there's that leap to be able to say that if God has called you by the gospel, enlightened you with his gifts, sanctified and kept you in the one true faith, if he has claimed you to be his very own, then you already know him, right? You already know him. And so to say, know the Lord is a little redundant, stupid, because they already know the Lord. And that's kind of part of the point. That's part of the point. The broader point is still connected to, I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Well, if he's putting their law within them, this can be applied to not just believers who already know the Lord, but this can be applied to everyone. That everyone has the law written on their hearts. Everyone should be able to know the Lord. But why don't they? Well, they don't know the Lord because they continue to deny it, reject it, and continue to, with their stubborn wills and with the help and the power of Satan and the world, they break and hinder every plan of God's will. Versus God's will is designed to break and hinder every evil plan and purpose of the devil's will, the world's will, and our own sinful nature's will. So that's a part of this idea of having the law written on our hearts. That we would be a part of the people of God and that we would recognize it. So yeah, our will versus God's will, right? God's will win, but our will, in obstinance to it, doesn't realize that. We deny that, and we lie to ourselves about it. That's a part of the whole point. Keep rolling back. All right. But the house of Israel part really is in some sense significant for me. Because you'll note he talks about the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And there's a sense in which when he talks about this, he's making this distinction because Israel was the northern kingdom, Judah was the southern kingdom. But when he goes down the line, for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. When Jeremiah is writing before the temple falls and the southern kingdom, Judah, is sent off into exile, the land of Israel, the house of Israel, the kingdom of Israel has already been gone, right? So here, what does the house of Israel mean? The house of Israel then would mean, and again, I didn't look this up, so I'm kind of going on my theological processing of things, that the house of Israel means the people of faith, right? The body of believers. The body of believers, the house of Israel, they're the ones that have this covenant. They're the ones that receive this new covenant. And this new covenant is one that's going to have the law written on their hearts. It's the one that you're not going to need to teach to your brothers or neighbors because they're already going to know it. It's so prominent, so vast, and more importantly, it's a covenant of forgiveness. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. That part of it all goes into who the house of Israel is. What is this meant for the house of Israel? Versus one of the things is Judah goes into exile, and when the Judeans come back from exile, they then start to refer to themselves as Jews. They then start to identify and associate with the Jewish faith, early Jewish faith style. And so they call themselves Jews. And so that's where you get, again, the understanding of what is a Jew. Well, a Jew is a Judean post-exile. Versus an Israelite is one who believes in God, one who believes in the Lord, one who follows the Lord, and the one who has his covenants with the Lord. That's who Israel is. Israel is the children of promise, right? Just as Jacob was the child of promise, just as Isaac was the child of promise, they weren't necessarily the firstborns, but they were the child of promise. And Isaac was the firstborn child of Sarah, even though Abraham had a firstborn child, Ishmael, with Hagar. So, this new covenant that he makes with the house of Israel is a covenant of forgiveness, versus the old covenant that was made at Sinai, which the Israelites broke. This was a covenant of law. And so many people will talk about the distinction between the Sinaitic covenant, the Jesus covenant, the Noahic covenant, and the Abrahamic covenant. That's a lot of different things. But the point there really goes into the fact that Israel is the people of God. And who is Israel today? Well, Israel today is those people that believe in God. They are the extensions of the ones that were brought up out of the land of Egypt. They are the extension of the ones that were delivered into the promised land. And they are the ones that follow Jesus Christ and know Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ is the Lord. The same Lord who brought him up out of the land of Egypt. The same Lord that delivered him from the hands of the various nations. The same Lord that was with David. The same Lord is Jesus Christ, our Savior. And he provides us with the forgiveness of sins. So what is the new covenant that the Lord is making? Well, the new covenant goes into the new covenant. This is the new covenant shed for you in my blood, right? This is Jesus' covenant that he makes by his death on the cross for the forgiveness of sins. Now, I promise to come back to this. Though I was their husband, you'll recognize that language in the New Jerusalem that comes down out of heaven is adorned as a bride. It's the bride of Christ, Who are the Israelites? They are the bride of their husband. And who is their husband? The Lord Jesus Christ. This is so much the conveyance of who Jesus is and who Jesus identifies himself with. This is Jesus with the people of Israel, and that's the new covenant that breaks down the wills of them, and that's how Israel is God's people. Israel is the bride of Christ. Rather than Israel is a Jewish nation, which that's a fact. I mean, Israel, there's a nation that's called Israel, and it is a Jewish democracy. Great. Wonderful. Maintain it. Don't slaughter people. Don't get up in arms against people. That's not the point. The point is not Jews are bad. That's not it. That's not the point. The point is, who is Israel? Israel is God's people. Who are God's people? They are the bride of Christ. So who is Israel? Israel is the church. Israel is those people who believe in Jesus Christ, who believe in the new covenant, who believe in the covenant. And that goes into the covenant of Sinai, that we should still remain faithful, in some sense, to the fact that God gave that covenant, right? Christ gave that covenant. The covenant, too, that was made to Noah, and that he won't flood the world or destroy it, but yet Jesus will return and cleanse the creation, but not with water, not again. So, but that's really the neat thing about Jeremiah 31, and that's kind of why I wanted to go culminate with this. So, thank you very much. This is my Sunday follow-up for the various lessons. We talked about Mark 10, we talked about Hebrews 5, we talked about Jeremiah 31. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below in the YouTube chat. Other than that, I'm usually live over on Kick. I try to get on about 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. It's not always a guarantee. It's just a try. But then I post these on YouTube afterwards. So feel free to drop questions anywhere you want. Thank you very much. And I'm going to stop. Say goodbye. Have a great week. If I can get my mouse to the right spot. There we go.